listening to 94.9 CHRW, and this is Gazette Radio. Gazette Radio is the official radio show of the Western Gazette, the student newspaper at Western University here in London, where we offer commentary, analysis, and even a little humor on the week's news. I'm Julian Uzielli.
I'm Cam Smith.
And I'm Jason Sinyukov.
Today on the show, we'll talk about a controversial catcalling column, the merits of veganism, and the Mustangs football team's unrelenting tide. All that and more on today's episode, but first, let's talk about the news. Before we get into it, I want to give a little plug to today's paper. It is a special 12-page edition, which only happens when we sell enough ads to add a few pages. It's a lot more work to put out, but it also means a better paper, I think. We've got 4 pages of news, as well as 2 pages of opinions. That's a full page of letters to the editor. The first time that's happened this year, so congratulations to Ops Editor Kevin Hearn for that. Also, this past weekend at Western, there was an USA General Assembly. That's the Ontario Undergraduate Student Alliance, where delegates from 7 universities across Ontario, as well as the Minister of Training Colleges and Universities, Brad Duguid, came to talk about post-secondary education, government policy, and how they can make changes for the better. So it's a pretty big deal. And it's a pretty big honor for Western to be able to host that event. And we were there, and we've got full coverage in today's paper in the news section. So definitely pick up a copy or read all about it on westerngazette.ca.
And I believe that is an exclusive, if I'm not mistaken, isn't it, Julian?
It is. That's a Gazette exclusive because, presumably, student papers from the other schools didn't have the travel budget to attend, just like we don't have the budget to go anywhere else.
Well, we can barely travel out of the parking lot with our budget, so...
Are you listening, USC? So I'm going to do things a little bit differently today. Normally in the news segment I'd talk about our top news stories, but last week we only had 2 issues because of the fall reading break. So instead we're going to talk about a head-to-head column that appeared in our opinion section last Tuesday, entitled, Should Catcalling Be Saved or Spayed? So this head-to-head was between Gazette Radio's own Cam Smith and our online editor, Jessica Hurst, and they were debating whether or not catcalling on the street constitutes sexual harassment. Perhaps surprisingly, it was Jessica who argued that catcalling critics were overreacting. In her column, she wrote that making an observation about physical appearances does not necessarily equate to reducing people to their appearance alone. We have Jessica on the show today to talk about this column and the reaction it received. Hey, Jess.
Hello, Western.
So, Jess, can you tell us a bit about how the idea for this column came about?
Yeah, I think like most of our columns come about, or our opinion pieces, we were just kind of talking about it in the office. And Cam and I noticed that we had differing viewpoints, so we thought that it might be interesting to put our opinions out into the public.
So some might find it odd to see in a head-to-head setting like this a woman defending catcalling and a man condemning it. Why did you decide to defend it?
Yeah, I guess that's interesting. But I think that because women may experience it more, we have more of an opportunity to kind of think about it critically. I prefaced my column with the fact that, yes, sometimes it can be harmful, and sometimes it could maybe be considered sexual harassment, but I defended it because I don't think that it always necessarily means that.
Spoth?
Well, I mean, as a man, I have been subject to less catcalling, undoubtedly. But I think that what's important to realize is that generalizing something as kind of not harmful when it is very obviously harassment for many, I think is kind of a dangerous thing. That's why I felt the need to respond in the way I did. In my opinion, it is street harassment. I think many women find it harassing to be called out based on their appearance, kind of no real interest in getting to know who they are, usually quite vulgar, quite, crude comments or gestures or, whistles or hoots. I mean, it's very animalistic. So you could say that in itself, I think, Julian, you actually referred to it as just kind of caveman-like and ignorant, and that it is that. But more than that, it is a damaging and regressive social habit I really find quite disgusting that offends many women, but beyond that, reduces them to an object of sexual desire, subjecting them to the desire of men, and vice versa. I suppose men could be catcalled as well, and subjecting them to the desire of women.
Jess, you disagreed with that in the column, right? You said it does not necessarily reduce a woman to a sexual object, right?
Yeah, I did disagree. And I think it's because you can comment on someone's appearance without necessarily reducing them to a sex object. I think I might have referenced this in my column, but I think if someone goes up to someone else in their class and says, "Hey, nice hair," or something like that, it might not be taken the same way as catcalling, but I think it's kind of a similar or circumstance sometimes. So yeah, I do have to disagree with it that it's not always objectification. It's not always reducing women to sex objects.
Well, it's interesting, Jess, that you should mention someone going up to a class and addressing someone face-to-face and saying, "Oh, you have nice hair." And I think in many ways catcalling and compliments are similar in the sense that they're generally referring to someone's appearance. The difference with a compliment is if you're approaching someone, you wish to say something nice. Like I often tell Julian that his hair looks lovely, as it does today.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Julian. But the point is, I've opened a dialogue with him. I've looked him in the eye and I said, "Hey, you look nice today." And he can say, "Hey, thank you." But if I was to make a crude comment about a woman's body to her face, she could come back and say, "Hey, I find that inappropriate. I think that's very off color. Didn't appreciate it." And we've opened up a kind of dialogue that wouldn't happen if I was walking across the street and someone hooted and called and gestured wildly at me. And I think that the difference with catcalling is it's really one way. It's a one-way street imposing this kind of gaze on the person receiving the catcalling, which a compliment doesn't really do.
Well, so we got a bit of feedback about the article. One in particular, there was a tweet from @SassRobin. She said, editorial from @UWO Gazette, Jessica Hurst, is so poorly written, trying to normalize catcalling as not sexual assault. So I noticed two things about this tweet. First of all, she misspelled your name, Jess.
Yeah, I noticed that as well.
But, of course, you also retweeted this, which I got to say is probably my personal favorite way of dealing with the haters on Twitter. But what were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I honestly retweeted it just because I wanted her to know that I acknowledged the tweet, but I didn't think it was necessary to respond. But yeah, I thought it was a little bit ridiculous, especially that she said that it was sexual assault, because I don't think catcalling can ever be considered sexual assault. Maybe sexual harassment in some cases, or some can argue in most cases, but definitely not sexual assault. And also, just because something, or you don't agree with a column, doesn't mean it's poorly written.
I agree with you there. And, you know, I was just saying to Smoth the other day, my own feelings on this, I guess, got to fall somewhere in the middle between you guys. Mm-hmm. I certainly don't think it's sexual assault, because you're not literally going and assaulting someone physically, right? But yes, it can certainly be harassment, right? And I think that we can all agree that the people who are catcalling are not exactly paragons of virtue. These aren't nice, polite gentlemen offering you a compliment on a fine day. You know, this is it makes you look kind of ignorant.
Yeah, of course. You know, I'm not saying that people should start taking up catcalling. I'm not even saying that I particularly enjoy it. All I was trying to say in my column is that I don't necessarily think it's always as bad as some people make it seem. As I said, some instances maybe, but definitely not all.
I think that's fair. I guess it should be up to the person receiving the calls, no?
Definitely.
You know what? You can interpret basically anything as any way you want. And if you interpret catcalling as a compliment, you're more than welcome to do so. I just caution those against taking that as an excuse to make catcalls, because not everyone finds it so complimentary, and I think that many people find it harassing, in fact. So, you know, I guess it's up to the interpretation of the individual.
All right, and I think that is about all the time we have for news today, so thank you guys for that stimulating discussion.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I will now hand it off to Smoth for Arts and Life.
You're listening to 94.9 CHRW, and this is Arts and Life. So, it was a mighty damp Halloween, I must say. I dressed as Ernest Hemingway, and I was soaking wet, so I looked like the old man in the sea.
Womp womp.
I can't begin Arts and Life without some sort of pun. I just can't do it. So it was a nice Halloween if you were an amphibian. Alas, we are not. We are mammals, I'm pretty sure. And I must say I envy Grandfather Julian, who sat in his home warm and dry, handing out candy to the children.
There were even nice cozy blankets involved.
Blankets, of course. Old Smoth here was traipsing around town, soaking wet. But I had a good time. What about you, Jason?
Yeah, I had a great time. I'm not an amphibian, but I sort of avoided the weather with a bunch of house parties instead of going out like I originally planned. Still made for a good enough Halloween.
Well, that's fantastic. So happy Halloween, everyone. Hope it was safe and fun. But moving on to Arts and Life, last week, the Gazette's Kevin Huron had the exciting opportunity to interview celebrity comedian and infamous voice actor Gilbert Gottfried before his roast of London on Saturday night. But I mean, really, what bad could he have to say about London? Right, guys? I mean, what could possibly be...
aside from the fact that our mayor is on trial for allegations of, felonies and things like that, it's really not... it's a pretty great place to live, right?
London is the city of opportunity. Didn't you guys hear the theme song last year?
Yeah, that was a theme song.
Who could forget?
But, he was a notoriously edgy comic. You can read the entire interview in the paper. He proposed that he may have said the edgiest joke of all time. It was one of the very ensuing days of September 11th, and he decided to make a September 11th joke in front of an audience in New York.
Oh, great idea.
Mm-hmm. Yep. As he said, the smoke was still in the air when he was saying this joke, and it essentially he said his plane, had to make a quick stop when he was heading to L.A. at the Empire State Building.
So you're saying the joke was not well received?
Gottfried said in the interview that it was received with boos and hisses and someone yelling famously too soon, to which he thought they meant he delivered the punchline too quickly.
Of course.
But apparently he proceeded to make comments about bestiality and incest and distracted everyone from the terrorist joke that so horrified them. But, it is a great article last Wednesday, and you should read it in the full transcript. Very interesting guy, funny guy. Although I must say, I did hear him speak. I was very kind of disappointed. The Gottfried voice, the one.
Oh, yeah.
It's Gilbert Gottfried. Gilbert Gottfried is a bit of an exaggeration. I mean, he has an interesting voice, but it is not the Iago I grew up with.
Oh, that's too bad.
Also, I'd like to take this time to say that Aladdin was the best Disney movie. So,
have you heard Gilbert Gottfried read 50 Shades of Grey?
Yes,
I have not.
It's unbeatable. It's just, the book is funny enough on its own, but when you hear him read it in that voice, I couldn't stop laughing for days.
Yeah, that's a very interesting juxtaposition of Gilbert Gottfried's voice and the writing of the legendary E.L. James. But anyways, so Gottfried's article, written by Kevin Huron, great little interview with the Gazette, so you guys should check it out. But one more thing, Julian. Speaking of, the controversy of the 9/11 joke, I thought it might be great to have Gottfried maybe write a comic for us.
Oh, yeah, of course you would suggest that, because I believe the comic you're referring to was actually your idea, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it was not.
Got us in all kinds of trouble.
I'd like to note that I did not write the comic or draw the comic. I merely thought it was, not as bad until I saw it the next day and was very horrified. But Gottfried played it off. Maybe we could play it off. But speaking of pushing buttons, we had a very kind of controversial column in Arts and Life last week. And here joining me today is our favorite guest in A&L, Marianne Chosk. How are you, Marianne?
I'm great, thanks.
So your column, called But Do Vegans Swallow, received quite a bit of flack from the vegan community. Can you tell us a bit about your column, what it was about, and why do you think you received such a response?
I wrote the column last week, and I really thought it was just kind of going to be like this little trivial, fun piece that I could write about. Like, I have a vegan column. I've written why I became a vegan before, and for this one I just, sometimes people just, ask you a million questions about what it's like being a vegan, and one of the more nosy ones I've gotten was, do you swallow semen? And I thought technically that should have nothing to do with veganism, but it's kind of a funny question, because if you're going based solely on the definition of no animal byproducts, then that should not actually be a vegan substance. So I wrote this article that was just talking about all the million different kinds of ways that vegans would technically not be vegan if they adhered to that definition. And I guess the vegan community kind of took that as an insult. Like, I thought that that's what vegans should adhere to. In the final paragraph, I did clarify that my point is kind of that you have an ideology based on your values. Like, for being a vegan, for me, I want to support the ethical treatment of animals and have a healthier lifestyle, that kind of stuff. Whether or not you use Purell, whether you have a wig made of someone else's hair, these are the kinds of things that don't actually relate to the values behind veganism at all. So that was kind of the point of the article, which was very much confused by the audience, I guess.
Well, one of the chief characteristics of satire, of course, is that you're always going to get a few people who don't understand that it's satire.
Yeah, it was a lot more than I was expecting. It just seemed to be pretty much everyone who commented thought it was kind of just like a serious piece about what vegans should do with their life.
Well, Marianne, I can rest assured that I got it. I thought it was funny. I will say this: no matter what you can or cannot swallow, I will remain a meat eater. I just simply don't have the willpower required to treat my body well. So, I admire you marathon runner vegans, but some of us here like a nice juicy burger and a cold beer and going to bed early. So,
well, apparently that's what the vegan community thinks I like now too. So.
Hey, who are you calling grandfather now, Smoth?
Yeah. Well, you should see how he's dressed today. He looks.
You're the one wearing a cardigan.
Okay, we both look like grandfathers. We're both grandfathers, okay? And Jason is our 40-year-old son. Anyways, that's about all for Arts and Life. But, Marianne, do you have any final words you want to say to the haters, spelled with a Z, out there?
I guess maybe read through the whole article before reading the first paragraph and becoming offended.
I'd like to echo that. We had one comment, a letter to the editor, who actually said that by publishing this article, we were directly harming animals, which obviously they didn't get the satire. But even if it wasn't satire, I really have to take issue with that.
They also called you a speciesist, Marianne. A speciesist. So, curse you for being a speciesist. But anyways, that actually concludes A&L, folks. And on to sports.
Thank you, Smoth. You're listening to Gazette Radio on 94.9 CHRW. Today I'm joined by Associate Editor and new intern for the Globe and Mail, Caitlin McGrath. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, thank you for announcing that to everybody in London.
Shameless plugs for the win. So first up is the Mustangs scorecard. The women's lacrosse team won their third consecutive OUA championship on Sunday afternoon, beating the Guelph Griffins 13-8. Both the men's and women's rowing teams won gold at the Canadian University Championships, and because of their outstanding performances, 14 Mustangs were named Canadian All-Stars. Lastly, the women's soccer team came in second in the OUA Championships and moves on to nationals. Now on to Mustangs football. Now, it's one thing to do it during the regular season, but the Mustangs got some sweet revenge on Saturday after defeating the McMaster Marauders 32-3 to advance to the Yates Cup Finals. For those of you who don't know, the Mustangs were previously eliminated in the playoffs for the last 2 years by the Marauders. This was their first game after they capped off their undefeated 8-0 season, and even though they beat the Marauders early on in the season, they were a new-look team this time around with all of their substitutions. And for Coach Greg Marshall, with the new-look opponent comes a more balanced and new strategy.
We'll see how they come out and defend us. And, one of the things that we're going to use our entire playbook to win this football game. And, in recent weeks, we've kind of been holding things back. We're going to try to do everything we can. We're going to throw, we're going to try to run it, we're going to mix it up. So it's going to be an exciting game. Their defense is healthy and a lot more confident than we played them early in the season.
Yeah, so clearly they were a new team, and Greg Marshall's new strategy, he mixed up a lot during the game. It clearly worked. They won 32-3. But going into the Yates Cup Finals, we've seen teams go undefeated before, and both on the OUA and the NFL level, and it does add tremendous pressure. What do you guys think? Will this add any additional pressure for the Stangs going to the Yates Cup Finals?
I'm not sure that it will, I mean, they've They've been undefeated all season, and so far this season they've had 2 big games against 2 big rivals. They had Queens on homecoming, and then just this past weekend where they crushed McMaster, who knocked them out of the playoffs the last 2 years in a row. I can't even imagine how high their morale must be flying right now. We've had this debate before around homecoming when, they were facing the undefeated Queens Gales. They won, right? They've pretty much crushed every opponent they've faced this season. Obviously there's always pressure with a final game in a playoffs like this, but I really they've got so much momentum. I can't see them losing.
You know what, Jason? I feel dissimilar to Julian in the sense that I fear that the pressure is mounted to a point where it's almost reached critical mass. They have won all their games this season. This is arguably one of the greatest Mustang football teams of all time. We've watched in amazement as they've conquered and crushed everyone they've ever come up against. But here's the thing. This final game is going to prove whether the pressure will harden them into diamonds or crumble them like brick. It's unfortunate that they have to face such pressure, but alas, this is what going undefeated all season means, and being undefeated in the final in their finals. We'll just have to see what happens. I'm not saying that they're going to roll the undefeated Tide yet. I want to see what happens. I want to see if this Tide can get rolled one more game.
Caitlin?
I talked to Greg Marshall after the game, and I asked him at the beginning of the season, did you think that this was a Yates Cup-worthy team? And he said every year he goes into the season being optimistic and thinking that the team is not only a Yates Cup-worthy team, but also a Vanier Cup-worthy team. So what I got from that is that Greg Marshall is confident right now, and so is the rest of the team. In fact, I think the team is oozing with confidence. And what I really think is that we have home field advantage. We're going to have the crowd behind us. This team has been to the big stage before. We've been to Yates Cups before. In fact, Greg Marshall has led the team to a Yates Cup every single year he's been coaching here except for one, and that was last year when we were eliminated by McMaster. So Greg Marshall knows how to coach. He knows how to coach in big games, and he knows how to coach during Yates Cups games and to get us a win. So I'm fairly certain that the Mustangs have a good chance to come away with the cup and keep moving on in the playoffs.
Yeah, well, I'm going to kind of have to take a middle stance here. Obviously, what Smoth says holds a lot of weight. It's undeniable that they have a lot of pressure going in. I mean, Sportsnet named them one of the top 100 teams to watch in the world. In the world right now. So, I mean, they're in everyone's eye, not just London's, not just the OUA's. Besides that, as Julian and Caitlin said, they've won they've beaten every challenge that they've come across. They are a team that will, honestly, in my opinion, will probably beat Queens and win the Yates Cup. And it's funny that you said that Greg Marshall said that they were a Yates Cup team at the beginning of the season, Caitlin, because they've been dominant pretty much all season. Mm-hmm. But in our first radio show, we didn't expect this kind of dominance on the team, and neither did Greg Marshall.
We'd be good. I really didn't think we'd be, as good and as dominant as we've been. Part of that is the great play of our young offensive line, the emergence of a guy like George Johnson, and the consistency that Will Finch has played with. So pleasantly surprised, but I guess, I've coached for a long time, so nothing surprises me anymore. I did think we were going to be a pretty good team. I'm encouraged. This has been a fun year for me, and certainly I've enjoyed working with the guys on offense because they're a young group and really energetic.
So we talked about the dominant win and how great they've been all season, but how'd they get it done against the Marauders, Caitlin?
Oh, well, certainly it was their defense. I mean, during the first half, they held McMaster to only 82 offensive yards. In the whole game, they only had 268 offensive yards. Now, what was funny, though, was that the Mustangs' offense was struggling a little bit in the first half. They had to really rely on Hairelahu to nail those field goals because that's all the points the Mustangs were getting in the first half. So he got 5 field goals to put the Mustangs up 15-0. The defense stood on their head. They were always stopping the MAC every time they came close to the end zone. The defense stood tall. What was one of my favorite moments was Preston Huggins, who has had a couple big plays this year, and it was funny. Speedy McMaster receiver Mike DeCroce was running down the field. He looked like he was in for a sure touchdown, and Preston Huggins just came running and caught him and knocked him down. So, and that stopped Mac, and they didn't actually score on that drive. So that was a big play for me.
Yeah, actually 2 years ago it was an 80-yard bomb to DeCroce that pretty much ended the Mustangs season right there in the Yates Cup. So yeah, that must have...
He's had our number in the past.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree. Liram Hajrullahu and his field goals, 3 of them were from 40-plus yards, which is outstanding. Finch threw... He didn't throw, he didn't do as well as he's done in the past. It wasn't one of his best games, and Yannick Carew scored both the touchdowns. So, I mean, as far as the offense goes, it wasn't their best game. It was definitely the defense and Hajrullahu.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, going forward, Finch is going to have a stronger game against Queens. Maybe it was nerves, who knows, but they won't be able to rely solely on field goals against a strong team like Queens, that's for sure. So, I mean, what do you think, Jason? What do you think they have to do?
To beat Queens, honestly, the defense has stepped up in every game. I mean, the most points they've allowed was 31 at homecoming against Queens themselves, besides that 27 versus York. But the offense stepped up in both those games. They won 50-31 against Queens, 80-odd points against York. I mean, the offense has to step up against Queens. This is not a team that will lay over if the Mustangs don't do anything about it. The defense and Hajrullahu can't carry them through this game.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned York because I think York was one of their strongest offensive games, and then, of course, they followed that with one of their strongest defensive games. So perhaps a combination of the two would result in, one of the best games we've seen this season and seen for the past few years from the Mustangs. So I think that's something I hope happens against Queens so that, the home crowd gets to see a stellar game.
Julie, what do you think?
I'll admit, earlier in the segment, I did use up pretty much my entire reserve of intelligent commentary on sports. I'll tell you, everything I know about the Mustangs football, I've known from editing articles in the Gazette Sports section, which have been pretty good this year. But I do know from that, Liram Hajrullahu I think he's now the CIS all-time scoring leader. Is that...
That's true.
Yeah, so, I mean, of course, we can't just rely on him for field goals to win the game, but he's a guy, if we did have to rely on somebody for field goals, it would be Hajrullahu. He can take the team pretty far.
He is insanely consistent with his field goals.
Funny enough, he got 5 in the first half, as Caitlin said, but he got 6 overall in the game against McMaster, and... that ties both the CIS and OUA record for most field goals in a game. So that's another record he almost broke that day.
He's a field goal machine. And I mean, when you think about it, setting the all-time CIS scoring record, you'd expect that to be somebody getting touchdowns. I mean, touchdowns are worth more points than field goals, and he did it with field goals.
Yeah, and extra points.
Extra points.
That's all the time we have for sports, and that's it for Gazette Radio. Julian?
That's about all the time we have for Gazette Radio today. The Gazette publishes Tuesday through Friday, so pick up a copy next time you're on campus. Today we've got a special 12-page issue, including a full page of letters to the editor. That comes from sending us letters at westerngazette.ca/contact. So keep them coming. We want to have more full pages of letters in the future. We read everything you'll write, and we print the best ones in the paper. The intro music